I had that belief that I was inherently bad, that I was inherently a monster. And that was really, really hard to work through.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. My name is Reesa and I'm your host. We are talking to real families about real stories here on The Real Family Eats, where we've got food for thought and thoughtful food. So let's eat. Hey everyone, so my guest today is the lovely Jessica. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to virtually cook with you. I'm a little disappointed I
Yes.
don't get to be there to eat it though.
I know,
Maybe over
I'm
here a
so
little
excited
jealous.
to hear this. Well, for anybody who doesn't know you, could you introduce yourself for us?
Sure. So I'm Jessica Good. I'm an EMDR certified therapist and MDRA consultant in training. I'm also a parent. So I have a toddler. It has been exciting being a parent, but there's also a lot of stuff that comes up with it. So I have a background, my own like trauma background, and a lot of things with parenting has it's brought up different things that were activating or triggers for me. There's just been a lot that I've had to unpack from my own process going through this, which is ironic because the work that I do is all in attachment developmental trauma, of course, right? Like that's the joke. If you want to know what a therapist has personally dealt with, what's their specialty? What do they do, right? So yeah, that's what I'm here to talk about today is parenting through your own childhood trauma, how that looks going forward as a parent, how your inner child maybe even feels, because I do a lot of parts work and so I do a lot of parts work with myself. And it's just something that people are starting to talk about more, but I think that there's a lot of shame that comes up whenever we talk about it.
Absolutely. And you're spot on. And that's part of the drive and the motivation for me, even starting this whole passion project, because you're absolutely right. And I'm so sick and tired of it. So sick and tired of the curtain that we put up, trying to kind of that facade, right? Like you said, because
Mhm.
oftentimes it is the trauma, the shame, the embarrassment, the guilt. That's another big one that I hear a lot of. And so I'm so excited to hear about your story and what you're willing to share with us today. Before we get started, though, for anybody who does need your services, this is our shameless plug section. So please plug away of all the wonderful things that you offer.
So I have a lot of different working components with my business and everything, but I do have a private practice and I do EMDR intensive type therapy. So these are longer sessions. Sometimes people come and visit me from out of town to do these. And as I said, I'm an attachment focused EMDR therapist. So I help people in all the areas that they have that attachment wounding coming up. So with their love and romantic relationships, with their relationships with money, with their family dynamics, all of those things. So my
Mm.
private practice, if anyone is curious and wants to check it out, it's goodemdr.com. And then if you guys just want to learn about EMDR, I have a TikTok channel. So it's at Jessica Good LPC. And on there to share a lot of information for folks, not only for the general public that doesn't know about EMDR therapy and everything you can do with it, but also for professionals that have been curious about getting trained or maybe just got trained or don't feel quite confident in their skills. I go live, I think right now it's every Thursday night. And I just
Okay.
love having people come on and ask questions and just give a lot of psychoeducation and help people get good therapeutic experiences.
Wonderful. And so for your direct services as an EMDR therapist, what state are you in so people know kind of where you're licensed and who can get your services?
Yeah, that's a great question and something I probably should have said before. So I'm physically licensed, or like my physical office location is in St. Louis, Missouri. So I'm licensed to practice virtually throughout Missouri and also
Okay.
Florida. I am an LPC. So as the counseling compact goes into enactment, I believe it's supposed to be early 2025, then I'll start offering to more states, but that's dependent. I'm pretty I get booked out pretty decently
Mhm.
already. So I don't know if I want to add all these different states and then not be able to help people in those places. So we'll see. We'll see where that's at. But for right now, it's Missouri and Florida.
Wonderful. And all of those links will be down in our show notes as usual. So tell me, I'm so curious about this recipe. What recipe are you sharing with us today, and why did you pick this one?
So originally I was going to do my grandma's chicken and dumpling recipe. And then I'm like, you would have to stew a full chicken and do all of that. And like, it would take way too long. It would take hours of work. No way am I doing that to you. It's yummy, but like, no, we're good. So I picked one that is a favorite of mine and a favorite of others whenever we have any sort of get together. I've been making this recipe since my mid 20s, I think, maybe even earlier than that. So it was like undergrad or grad school. I think it was undergrad actually. There was this little tapas place by us. I loved it. I was a broke college student though, and
As we are.
couldn't go there,
Yes.
right? I couldn't go there all the time. So I was eating this dish and it's a spicy baked goat cheese dip. And I was like, you know what? I think I could make something like this. I think I could do this. So I started making it at home and then I just bring it to all these little get togethers if I had a girls' night or something like that, a game night. And it was so simple and easy. And I think that that's really important for us as parents is to have stuff that's simple and easy. But also like my toddler isn't eating this dish because it's a little spicier. You could make it without spice by just doing the regular
Mhm.
red sauce, but um I feel like for parents, we still need to have those moments where we're having our little get togethers, we're doing our little thing, even if it can't be both parents, like maybe one's watching our child or children. And you need something fast. You need something that you can quickly do, that you can bring together that feels kind of like, oh, this actually feels kind of nice, right?
Yeah.
Like,
It's a
I think
little
we
treat for
lose that when we're
yourself.
in the grind. Yeah, exactly, exactly. A little treat
Yeah.
that doesn't take a lot out of us because we have
Mm.
way, like, so much going on already.
And I love that. And you're absolutely right. And I love the idea of really kind of something to also pour back into yourself, it sounds like, and being able to kind of fill your cup in those ways with something yummy and warm. So I'm so excited. Okay, so tell me what the steps are to this recipe. I'll get cooking while we chat a little bit about your journey.
Okay, so first up, you're going to want to preheat your oven to like 350, about
Okay.
that. And so after you heat that up, then we're going to start on the bread, the crostini. So I don't
Okay.
know if you got the like the Italian loaves or the like French baguette. Did you go skinny French baguette or did you go
Yeah,
Italian?
I did French baguette. I've got them sliced
Nice.
here.
Okay, perfect. Oh, you already have it sliced. Perfect.
Yes.
So you're going to heat up the oven. You're going to pour some olive oil. I think it was about 4 tablespoons, I said, into a little
Mhm.
dish. You're going to mince up some garlic, or you can do the canned kind. This recipe, I made it so that, whatever you've got going on, you can do. So if you want to make it more complicated, you can. If you don't, make it super easy on yourself, whatever you've got at hand. So you're just going to pour the minced garlic, 2 to 3 cloves into that olive oil, let that sit, line a baking sheet with some parchment paper because yay, easy cleanup. You're going to put the
Mhm.
bread on there, brush it with that olive oil garlic mixture, put that into the oven. I think it's about like 15 minutes that it'll be in there, but you can check it and make sure that it's appropriate for whatever type of bread you did. And then after that is done, you'll just set that to the side and it'll cool. And then we'll crank that oven actually up to about 400 degrees. And
Okay.
the dip recipe, very super simple. So if you have a spicy red sauce, so like an arrabbiata sauce, then you can just pour that in there. If you don't have that on hand or it's not at your local market or whatever, just take some pasta sauce and some red pepper flakes from your cabinet. If you want to get really spicy with it, you can put a little cayenne in there too.
Oh,
Depends on your
okay.
heat level. Depends on your heat level that you like. I like eating like bulldog noodles, so I like a little heat. Um, so you just sprinkle that in there if you need to, mix it up. But you're gonna have about like an inch and a half, 2 inches of pasta sauce. You want a kind of smaller dish. I always use like my smaller, like Corningware little casserole dish thing.
Mhm.
And then you'll just take the goat cheese, or if you're not a goat cheese fan, Boursin cheese works really well. And you just put that in there about 2 inches of
Okay.
actual cheese. So either a big hunk if you're doing Boursin, or about 2 inches if you're doing a goat cheese log. And you'll put like two or, however many you end up doing. I'm not going to hold anyone back on the goat cheese they decide to use because I love it.
Yes.
Yeah. And then you'll just pop that into the oven and it cooks, not that long, like 10, 15 minutes, something like that. And it'll be bubbly and the cheese will start to get kind of like gooey, and easily, like it'll spread really easily.
Mhm.
And then you'll just take that out of the oven and just slice up some basil. If you like fresh basil, if you don't have to put it on there and you can just sprinkle that over the top and then dip some bread in there and you're good to go.
Perfect. Well, I can do all of that. Like you said, sounds pretty straightforward. So I'll get things going. And while I do that, I'd love to hear more. I know you kind of gave us a sneak peek as far as some of your journey kind of having to do with figuring out how to move forward in parenting, kind of with your own bag, of trauma, like you said, that you're
Mhm.
carrying with you and how to do that. And so I'd love for you to kind of walk us through a little bit of some of that journey for you that you've experienced and kind of how you've navigated that, because that's really tough. And I think that's something that many of us parents absolutely can relate to.
Oh yeah. It's definitely interesting. So I am obviously not first generation somebody in my family that's experienced trauma. Typically that goes down the lines. We have generational trauma. And my mom's was, you know, she had a heavy amount of trauma that she went through. My dad had more of like a narcissistic family system, right?
Okay.
So unfortunately, that led to my dad being that way as well. And they grew up old school, so lots of physical punishment, that kind of stuff,
Mm,
right?
got it.
My
Okay.
dad, yeah, my dad was very emotionally and verbally abusive. So that wasn't great growing up. It doesn't really, I, I look at what I've accomplished, what I've been able to do, and it's actually really surprising given the kind of negative encouragement, if you will, that I got as a child.
Yeah. Can you say more about
It
that?
was
Like what would that look like?
So I'm neurodiverse. I have ADHD, but I also have giftedness. I don't like that term. I wish it was something different. But that means that I have a high IQ among other things, right? So my one of my dad's go-to things that he would say, like he would always be like, "Are you stupid? Are you?" That slur that we don't use, that we don't say,
Yeah.
because that's really horrible. Those sorts of things. So that was that negative encouragement, if you will. And I'm putting that in
Gotcha.
quotes because obviously I'm joking about that little dark humor there. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, so he would say things like that, and there were like a lot of expectations on me that I needed to just succeed no matter what, though my family like didn't give me help with education things, and it was a whole thing.
Hmm.
It was not great. And so I didn't have a lot of really good ideas about myself built up. I thought that I was a pretty terrible person.
Wow.
Whenever I would do different things and have accomplishments, it'd be really hard for me to take those in and really feel pride. There were a lot of negative things that I thought about myself. And I think one of the biggest things though growing up is really the volatility in the house. So my mom, bless her, she has done a lot of work. My dad is no longer with us. He actually passed from ALS a few years back. But my mom has tried consistently, as I've become an adult and as she's really taken notice of these different things and honored my experience and what I've said, she has taken a lot of accountability and has continued to try to improve herself, which I do appreciate. My dad was just never going to be there. He passed, the same way whenever he passed, he was the same way whenever he was, alive. We
Mm.
never had that closure, that repair that happened, unfortunately. And that's another thing we have to deal with too, not only as parents, but
Yeah.
as humans too, is that complicated grief of if you don't deal with those things while somebody is alive, then you have to deal with it whenever they're gone too. So, one of the things that would happen in my house growing up is the emotional volatility. If my dad had a bad day, he would come home and scream at us. Like
Mm.
it was
Yeah.
oh, you see, dad's walking up to the house, you better scurry and act like you're busy and you're not like resting on the couch or whatever. Like you either need to be busy or out of sight.
Yeah,
Because
protect yourself, right? That's the message.
exactly, he's gonna
Mm-hmm.
unload from the day. Like we were his emotional outlet, not in a fun way. So that was terrible. The not being able to make mistakes. So as a small child, you break stuff, you mess things up, like that happens. It's a part of learning, it's a part of development. And so that really wasn't okay because we would get screamed at in our house or we
Mm.
would get physically punished too. So all of those things, even though I don't consciously, I'm not like, oh yeah, that's what you should do or whatever. There is definitely a part of all of us that have experienced that in childhood that still has that reactivity. And we really have to work through that. So yeah, my journey into parenthood actually happened after my dad had passed. So I had all that lovely complicated grief stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
had, a difficult
And then let's layer
pregnancy.
on pregnancy, like you said, parenthood. I mean, that's its whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So then basically it's been so interesting as my child is developing because my child's still a toddler. So they're growing and new things are coming up as they start, testing the limits and everything. And they just
Mm.
kind of like look at you as they're doing something. You're like, oh, you are boundary testing right now, aren't you? That's what's happening. It's so
Yeah.
interesting to see the differences not only in how I'm responding to them, which is both really heartwarming and then also really sad at the same time because there's that small part of me that wishes that I would have had that younger part of me that wishes that I would have had that kind of response to
Mm.
that kind of just really compassionate, empathetic response. So it's been a journey and I know it's going to continue evolving.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, kind of a little bit of that grief, like you said, of, hey, I'm able to do these things. I'm able to offer these compassionate responses as a parent. And then trying to make sense why couldn't I get the same thing as a child? Like what was the barrier
Mm-hmm.
there for me being able to receive these same things that, hey, I'm a parent right now and I'm offering to this little human also.
Oh, yeah. And most of us just internalize that of like, I wasn't this enough. I wasn't that if I
Mm.
was different. And that's where we come to that sense of really deep internal shame of I am bad because there's this sense of like, if I was better, then my parents would love me the way that I need. And when that
Mm.
doesn't occur, young kids, like we're very focused on ourselves whenever we're very young, because that's where our brain development is completely developmentally appropriate, but then it
Yep.
leads to those types of negative beliefs. And I had that belief that I was inherently bad, that I was inherently a monster. And that was really, really hard to work through. So, as a parent now, being able to have pride in how I am parenting my child is huge. But it's also, like I was saying, kind of sad. Like, whenever I was pregnant, I had one of the freakiest EMDR experiences that I have done of my own personal therapy. So
Okay.
I'm an EMDR practitioner, but I also get EMDR done. And yes, it is safe during pregnancy if you have trauma in your past and you need to process that out to like be like feel better, have less inflammation, have less activation. It's completely safe and normal to do. But I was doing an EMDR session with some parts work, of course, and this younger child part of me was jealous of my infant, well, my fetus, I guess, at that point in time, because I was still, gestating my child. But this younger part of me was jealous of my baby because I was going to get to experience that parenting that I never got to receive. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's making me tear up right now thinking about it because it's such a want and it's a
Yes.
hunger and it's an emptiness and it's something that unfortunately for a lot of folks, if they didn't experience it now, then as adults they are parenting themselves, they're parenting their children and parenting their parents still in some ways too. And it's like, oh, I never get that.
Mm.
Sitting with that, I will never get that.
Yeah. And like you said, the grief that kind of is attached to that. is
Hmm.
very real. And I know that I've spoken, in fact, another parent who's was willing to be a guest on it talked just about so much that there's so many periods of parenthood that have grief that we don't necessarily realize are there until, like you said, we're kind of experiencing that. And maybe we do have the support of a clinician or something kind of helping us really understand kind of where some of those feelings, those thoughts are coming from, because as you said, there's a lot going on there. And, I wanted to circle back. I heard you mention kind of that idea of parenting yourself. And can you say more about that? Because I know that that's something, in the clinician world, we say quite a bit, but not everybody kind of understands what do we actually mean when we say something like that? And what does that look like?
So, because I do parts work, and people might recognize like IFS or maybe the term ego states, those are both under the umbrella of parts work. But what we're looking at are those different little bits of yourself that got stuck in these different distressing times. So we'll say, like, if you've heard of the term inner child healing, right? So that reparenting is starting to work with our internal system, to work with the parts of ourself that pop up. So sometimes you
Mm.
may be like, oh, wow, I just got really upset about that. And I threw like a toddler tantrum, but I'm an adult. Well, it's probably a very young part of yourself that's actually feeling quite activated by that. So, how do you start to form that relationship with yourself? How do you start to meet those parts of yourself in a way that shows curiosity and compassion, very much what you needed at that point in time?
Mm.
So, whenever I'm talking about reparenting myself, if I'm noticing something up in myself, some sort of activation, I get curious about it, and then I try to meet that need. So maybe the need
Mm.
that I have at a certain point in time is like, I need comfort, or I need to feel safe, or I need connection, or maybe whatever it is for that individual part of myself. I'm able to come in and to meet that need. So that's what I mean by reparenting, is actually showing up for myself in the way that I needed whenever I was young.
Yeah, and I absolutely love that. And I'd love to know kind of a little bit more in your journey. How how did you work through that? Even just like, let's talk about that pregnancy piece and you recognizing kind of that jealousy piece of you, and kind of how do you manage through something like that where you can be able to kind of start to move forward versus getting stuck in it?
Yeah. So with that, I had to acknowledge the grief, right? That wish, that want, that desire, and that I will not have that, and that I can't do that fully for myself, and that my child's experience is not my experience. I think that is one of the
Mm.
hardest things too, whenever we're parenting, having had our own childhood trauma and our own maybe emotionally neglectful parenting situations, is how can I let my child have their own experience without me vicariously living through them to feel like all these things that I wanted, right? So I think,
Yes.
yeah, I think that separation is first and foremost, is we have to acknowledge they're their own person. I am my
Mm-hmm.
own person, and we have to have that separation. So acknowledging that what is coming up for me, what I'm feeling, is a me thing and not a them thing. So
Mm.
having that separation first is the most important. And then how can I attend to my needs, either in that moment, or like if I'm in parenting at that moment, like how can I hold that, compartmentalize it, put it in a container, tell myself like, hey, this is important. We're coming back to it, but we're going to come back to it whenever they're napping or they've gone to bed for the night, or we get a break, and we can do that. We can like ask the other parent for, a timeout that we need or something. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, that separation first, and then meeting what that need is. And sometimes it's just having that expression of emotion. So allowing myself to grieve that I didn't have that experience, and noticing the beauty of my child having that experience, but that I don't
Yeah,
need to cling on to their experience. That's what I needed in that
absolutely.
moment.
Yeah, and that's so beautiful. And I do want to kind of highlight that piece that you mentioned, that little nugget of um, that I think so many parents do kind of struggle and with, in the sense of not vicariously living through them, not really kind of making it a them problem, when really, if we were to get honest with ourselves, it's an us problem as the adult in the room. And that's such a difficult balance to navigate. And so to kind of really highlight that absolutely so many times it can be the easy route, if you will, to kind of
Mm-hmm.
be like, oh, it's a you thing. Like you said, you're a bad kid. It's something that you did wrong. Like
Mm-hmm.
this all could have been avoided if you had just been better. And to kind
Mm-hmm.
of be able to step back and say, well, hang on a second, like, let's be realistic about the fact that we're talking to a child who doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have, kind of all the capacities, and they have their bad days too. Yet they have a lot less time to mature, a lot less time to be able to build some of
Mm-hmm.
these skills, to regulate, in a way that we would want them to. And yes, we can work up to that, but it's not something that they're inherently born with. And so, offering some of that
Mm-hmm.
compassion and grace to them too.
Absolutely. Like that is whenever, so I also run a group, of course, group therapy for adult children of emotionally immature parents that are low or no contact with their parents. Long name. I need to change it. I know. Me and the group have talked about that. I'm like, but how do we encompass it all? But one of the things that we were talking about, I think in the group the other day was that idea of, oh, in emotionally immature family systems where you have a lot of emotional reactivity. And by the way, anyone listening to this, if you had emotionally immature parents, congratulations, you are also emotionally immature until we work on those things and we build that sense of
Yes.
emotional maturity. And that's because we only have the tools that we're given. So very
Mm-hmm.
much those children weren't born with tools. They have to learn those tools. Your parents, your caregivers, your primary caregivers are the people that help you the most with those tools. Hopefully also in school and education, all that, that like the more fostering of that we can get around it, the better. But we were talking the other day about how it feels like in those families that you were just supposed to know everything. Like, oh, you don't know how to do that? Like how don't you know how to do that, right? But no one taught you. So yeah,
Yeah.
how are you supposed to know that? But there isn't
Mm-hmm.
that reflection from those parents or caregivers. So everything, even the very trying things that my child does, like that boundary testing, like
Mm-hmm.
sorry, I'm cracking up thinking about them last night, just staring me just point blank in the eyes and just like trying to do
As they do
something. They
it.
were like waiting.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were waiting for me to like stop and we're saying, no, you can't do that, because we're at the point where we have to say no sometimes for safety. And like what they were doing was fine because I knew they safely knew how to get down from the furniture item they were on. Um, but oh gosh, sorry. I started laughing about that and then I forgot where I was going with it. Do you
Yeah, you were you were talking about that the whole idea again, going back to giving them that compassion and that grace,
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, developmentally appropriate. So
Uh-huh.
anytime there's a thing like the throwing phase and the no phase and the everything else like that phase, I just like give myself a little seat back, take a breath and remind myself it's developmentally appropriate. It's developmentally appropriate. And that's what I just say to myself over and over again. Like, and then we can proceed from there. Just a little reality check. It's developmentally appropriate. This is what's happening. That's their phase of development. It's okay.
Absolutely. And I'll just a little add piece to that it's also okay to be like, and it really sucks. It's developmentally appropriate
Mhm.
and it really sucks. Okay,
Yeah.
now what are we going to do? Because that's very fair. Like,
Uh-huh.
even though it is developmentally appropriate, it doesn't mean that it's easy or that, like you said, that we've
Nope.
been given a manual. They don't pop out, as much as I wish
Mhm.
they did, pop out with an instruction manual on your child specifically. They don't. And so being able
Mhm.
to also kind of, it's okay to say, like, this sucks. This is really hard.
Mhm. Absolutely. And that's whenever you make this dip and you go over to your friend's house and
Right?
you're like, we're having a small time here. We're gonna have a
Yes.
couple hours together for a break at some point.
Absolutely. And I'm so curious, like, as you're going through this journey, like, it sounds like there's been very moments where, like you said, you've had to sit back and kind of
Mhm.
evaluate what's coming up for you. Have there been any like aha moments for you that really helped you move from that place? I feel like I hear parents where we can kind of go one or two ways of saying, well, this is
Mhm.
all I know. And so how can I know anything else? To
Mhm.
saying, yes, this is all I know. I'd like to do something different, which it sounds like you kind of chose that for yourself.
Mhm.
Like, was there an aha moment for you that kind of really set you on that journey?
Of deciding like I'm not going to parent in the same way as my parents.
Yeah.
Oh, that was
And
way
making
before I
that
became a parent.
decision. Yeah.
That was way before I became a parent. That was before I even decided on my spouse, before I even met my husband. Like I knew that if I did, because there was a period of time where I thought that maybe I didn't actually want to have kids. There was a good portion, probably the second half of my 20s going into 30s, that I was like, I don't think I'm gonna have a kid. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got around 30, as some people do, not all people, because I think being child free is a completely valid choice. And I was like, and with my dad's like death and passing and everything, it really makes you think about life and mortality and everything. And I was like, you know what? I do want to have a child, at least one. We'll see what happens. Over here with all the controversial choices, like, being child free at first. And I was like, oh, I'll just have one kid. Now I'm like, oh, maybe I do want another. Who knows? We'll see what happens. But yeah, so going into that, even whenever I was child free, I knew that if I ever did have a child one day, that I would not parent in the same way, that was not
Mm.
the path I was going down. And so for me, looking for a partner, looking for a spouse, whenever I decided, like, hey, these are some different things that I wanted for my life, that was really important, is how are they going to be with a child? Like, how is their reactivity? What does that look like?
Mm.
Um, so I went in very eyes open to the whole
Okay.
parenting thing whenever it comes to mental, emotional type of stuff. And that's still, even being a therapist, even being somebody that I think prepared as much as one can prepare, it doesn't mean that you're immune to everything. Like things still do happen.
Yes.
I think some aha moments for me, some moments that were really hard and difficult, though, even with preparation, right, is I have misophonia. So loud sounds, specific ones like crying and like really loud, high pitched dog barking is the same way. But it makes me, and it's not like anger towards other people, but it makes me feel like I just want to take my own head and like bash it into a wall. Like that's how bad the sounds are with misophonia. So having an infant that is
Mm-hmm.
crying is difficult. So one of the moments there, I'm like, oh my gosh, am I not going to be able to hack this? Whatever. Then I found out that you could just get like noise dampening headphones, or not headphones, but earplugs. And it helps a
Yes.
lot with the sound. Like it takes the edge off. So it's not as like grating for you, because it
Mm-hmm.
causes like this like really ridiculous amount of like internal, and it's not towards other people. Again, like never was my child or my spouse or anything like that in any situation, but it's like towards yourself. It's like this really weird, like just make it like the sound stop for like myself.
Yeah.
So the earplugs were really great. That was a moment of, all right, like how can I feel like I'm a great problem solver. So I've really leaned into that in parenting. And then some of those moments, like as my child started getting a little older, and again, doing the boundary testing, all of those things that kind of like really get under your skin.
Mm-hmm.
Not only is there like the leaning back and saying this is developmentally appropriate, but there's also, I just started channeling like this feeling of like I do my breathing and like send my breath down and like imagine like I'm like a tree, like the roots, like I'm just like rooting my body
Yes. Love
with the
that.
ground, like really grounding, but just imagining being like really solid like a tree, and just like anything that's, the crying and toddler fussiness and all the things, right? That
Mm-hmm.
it's just like waves washing over you. So I'm actually able to like really be pretty present and centered in those moments when my toddler's having those toddler meltdowns, and like being able to be there for them. Um, but not like overreact or like lock my child in a room or
Mm-hmm.
spank them or anything else like that, which is what would have happened in my house growing up. So
Yeah.
those are moments, those are big, like those were hard moments, but they're also big moments of pride because I was able to work through that. So those big ahas of, wow, I guess I could have gone a different way. But also, whenever I think about somebody going a different way than that, I'm like, oh, that's heartbreaking. Like, how could we do, like, how did that happen? Like, how did my parents just see me crying and we're just like, oh, we're gonna spank you now, right?
Yeah.
Like, we'll give you something to cry about. Really?
Absolutely. And I think, like you said, just also maybe being able to have that couple seconds of like, look what I did. Even we're
Hmm.
so good at being really critical of ourselves and all the things that we're not doing or could do better. And
Yeah.
what I really loved about what you said of being able to step back and for, like I said, just a couple seconds, we're not asking for anything big, of just giving yourself that kudos of like, hey, look what choice I made. Like I'm
Mhm.
proud of that. That's really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that one of my favorite things is actually, this is going to choke me up a little bit too, is whenever my husband reflects what a good parent I am to me, because
Mm-hmm.
there's, again, whenever we had those really emotionally, verbally abusive type childhoods where you're not able to build a sense of pride in yourself, that like you can like really be like, oh yeah, I did this, like this was hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so my husband reflecting back, like, you're a really good mom. Like, you do this, that, and like these different things. And I get to, like, because I know it, but I don't get to, like, have pride. And it's like this weird residual thing from childhood. Right. And so whenever somebody else is reflecting that to me and I know that he really means it, it's just like, aw.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully my child thinks so too one day. Like, hopefully I can keep all
Yeah.
this stuff going as they get older. Let's hope. Let's see. I think
Yeah.
so. Pretty sure.
I believe that we can. Like you said, it may take some work. It may take us stepping back and, like you said, problem solving. And I think
Hmm.
that's just it. It's finding that motivation and making that choice to try something different than what you know, and
Yeah.
deciding, I'm not just going to rest on that. And so I think that's huge. And gosh, I love hearing that for you, because I want that for all my parents, is to be able to hear that and have us championing each other in this thing that's so hard to do. And
So
so
hard.
that's awesome. Um, as we get moving here and closing things up, I'd really love to know, are there any like resources or anything that you found kind of along your journey that maybe any of our listeners who are kind of working through their own stuff might, go, oh, okay, let me check this out.
Oh yeah, there are so many good books, but a few of them. So Dan Siegel's "Parenting from the Inside Out" I think is so good because that's that reparenting work.
Mm-hmm.
Good Inside, I think that's Dr. Becky. I think that's the name. I'm gonna stop saying author names because I'm probably gonna mess them up. But Good Inside, it's really great and lovely, and it comes from that just very attachment focused, very like shame reduction type of parenting, which is awesome. Um,
Yes.
all of Dan Siegel books are kind of really wonderful. I'm not going to lie. And then there's this one called Raising Good Humans, and that's about decreasing our reactivity as parents, which is very important, as
Yes.
anything I've said here has highlighted. Could have gone one way. I went the other. Very proud of going the other at this point in time. So those are some
Absolutely.
good ones, but there's a lot out there. And once you start like, shopping around for those books, they're going to give you other ideas for other books that are similar to that. I'm a huge audiobook fan because you can like just pop in some headphones, like listen to it while
Mm-hmm.
you're around the house, or I get most of my reading done while driving. So I do Audible or Spotify, and yeah, that's how I get a lot of that done. And it helps to have some of that, because not only is it here's information, here's psychoeducation, but there's the feeling of, oh, I'm not the only person that has needed this. And that feels
Yes.
really reaffirming. Like, oh, wait, there's a lot of people that actually have needed this. So
Mm-hmm.
much so that they wrote a book, like they wrote a bestseller about this. So I'm not alone.
Absolutely. I love that. And thank you so much for being willing to share that and share this recipe. I've got everything ready. I'll just pop it in the oven. I'm so excited to taste it. So thank you for sharing the recipe with me, and with our listeners as well. And I really do want to thank you about being willing to share this part of your story. As you know, I kind of said at the beginning, I think there's so much of that facade, and we're trying to kind of keep up with the Joneses, right? And so being able to kind of pull that curtain back with me, I thank you so much for normalizing that this is indeed hard, especially like you said, when you're coming from your own trauma background, and being able to kind of choose something different, because that's not easy.
No, and it definitely isn't an automatic choice for a lot of folks. Like there's so many ingrained things that we are fighting against.
Yes.
And it's a journey. It's a
It,
journey, that's for
it
sure.
really is. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to chat with me. And I really appreciate it. And I'm sure I'll have to tap you again and say, come and talk about, because I'm sure we could talk for days of all the difficulties of parenting.
Yeah, that's for
And
sure.
yeah. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time. If you or anyone that you know is struggling with any of the topics that we discussed in today's episode, make sure to check out our show notes for support and resources. You can get help. Thanks again for joining us on today's episode of The Real Family Eats. If you're a parent ready to share your real life parenting story, make sure to reach out to us in our website found in the show notes. And that goes for today's recipe, social medias, support, and resources. All of that can be found in our show notes. So make sure to check them out. And make sure to follow, like, share, subscribe, and stay up to date on all things The Real Family Eats. I hope you'll join us next time for more food for thought and thoughtful food. Enjoy your eats.